Dear children of ninth standard, there is a proverb which goes, those who tell stories rule the world. There is not a stronger connection between people than story. So, my first lesson this session, my dear students, will be on story writing. A story is generally designed to entertain or send a message across. Today we will be focusing on shorter format of story and we will take a look at the basic structure of the story. So when you write a story, you have to follow some structure called story arc or story mound. When you follow this structure of story arc or story mound, you will be able to develop a good story. So story arc or story mound goes like this. First, you start with exposition means the introduction of the story. Here you will give the background information about the protagonist. Protagonist means the hero, the main character of the story in normal life. So here in exposition, you can give the setting as well. Here, this will be in the first paragraph of your story writing. So in the first paragraph, you will introduce the character and you will give the setting. That is the exposition part of the story. Then goes to the conflict. This conflict is the driving force of the story that you're writing. So this is something that happens that creates a problem for the protagonist or the hero or the main character. And next is the rising action of the story. So rising action is the sequence that happen as a result of the conflict. Because of the conflict that is happening, there is a rising action that happen. This usually get more intense over time. It rises up, the problem will be bigger and bigger as it goes up till it reaches the climax, which is the most exciting part of the story or the turning point. And after, as the story reached the climax, it comes down, which is called the falling action. And there are some events that happen after the climax, that is the falling action. And next to the falling action is the resolution or the ending of the story. So this is the story arc or the story mound. Let's see the story arc of the story mound with an example. Here there is a boy or there is a character whose parents never let him stay alone. But one night the babysitter cancels and they have to let that boy stay alone, and everything starts off very fine and the boy was having lots of fun. So that is the exposition. That is how you introduce your story, how you introduce the character, and how you introduce the setting of the story. And now let's come to the conflict. So the conflict here is with a frog. Now that boy, that small boy, sees a frog in the hole and he was really afraid of frogs. So he was so scared, he was shrieking out. He don't know what to do. And the first thing that he does is he hid from the frog. Now that there comes the rising action. But and then after hiding from the frog, he thought that it will not help, and so he tried to trap the frog in a trash can. See how the story is developing. And then he failed to do it, and he tried to get the frog into a bag, and that also he failed. And finally, he chased the frog out of the house with a tennis racket. Now, that is the climax of the story. And then, after that, the boy spent the rest of the night cleaning up the mess that he had made. And then he get into his pajamas and he started watching TV. And at this point of time, the parents came home and everything seems to be normal. So the parents they plan another outing again. So now that is the end of the story. And here, the child consider asking not to be left alone, but he realized that the frog incident showed him that he is stronger than he thought. So this is how you have to build up your story using the story arc or the story mound. So now, children, let's come to the conflict of the story, which is the main driving force of the story. When we talk about the conflicts of story writing, there are three main types of conflict identified in literature. That is man versus man, man versus nature, and man versus self. Now, what you have to keep in mind is that these standard classifications use man as universal term. It can be a woman or women, or it can be some other animal character. So here it is, the man is termed as universal character. Now let's take a closer look at these three definitions of conflict. Now let's go to the man versus man. Here is a situation in which two characters have different desires and interests. Now, the typical scenario is a conflict between the protagonist, that is the main character, and then the antagonist, that is the villain of the story. So, this is an external conflict. Most thrillers and mysteries have this type of conflict. Most of the movies that we have in India have this type of conflict. So you can see the example of this type of conflict in Brown's Da Vinci Code and Agatha Christie's And Then There Were None. Now the next conflict can be man versus nature. In this type of conflict, a character is tormented by natural forces such as storms or animals. This is also an external conflict. Ernest Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea and Moby Dick by Herman Melville are examples of this type of conflict. Let's go to the next conflict, which is man versus self. This conflict develops from the protagonist's inner struggles. Now, protagonist, I repeat, this is a main character of the story, and it may depend on a character trying to decide between good or evil or overcome self doubts. This conflict has both internal and external aspects, as obstacles outside the protagonist force the protagonist to deal with inner issues. William Shakespeare's Hamlet is a good example of man versus self. Now, others have further identified more types of conflicts, such as man versus society. In this type of conflict, a character must take on society itself and not a single person. The character stands at odds with societal norms and realizes the necessity to work against these norms. This is an external conflict. Here are some examples of conflicts, such as John Steinbeck's The Pearl, Ralph Ellison's The Invisible Man, and The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. So here, children, these are the main conflict that you can think about when you're writing a story. So when you sit down and write and try to write a story, you ponder upon this conflict. You can take up one conflict, or you can mix up two conflicts as well when you write a story. And there are some other points that you have to keep in mind when you write a story. You have to make sure that your story, you give an exciting and appropriate title for the story, because a title is the first impression that you make on the reader. So now you have to write the title of the story at the top on top of introduction in the middle, and the story must have fluency, and there is a series of events that is taking place, and make sure that the flow has some order. And one important thing that you have to remember is that do not use flowery language or very difficult language or overuse complicated words. The best stories are written in uncomplicated words. So, children, these are the points that you have to remember when you write a story. Here, I'm going to give you two questions on which you can write story. Here, I have taken out some cues for you so that you can write story upon it. Note this down, and you can use this for your multiple assessment and for your subject enrichment as well. Thank you so much, children. See you tomorrow next time.